Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. May God add blessing to the reading, hearing, and living of this holy word this day.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
Amen.
One author described peacemakers as someone who does something to improve the situation. I'll say that again. A peacemaker is someone who does something to improve the situation. Now, this definition of peacemaking implies that there's some sort of pre-existing condition of conflict. And certainly, conflict is one of the things we think about when we talk about peacemaking. And we know about conflict. It's in our lives every day. It's in our news every day. I read that someone wrote this, and I'm going to take it on their word. They said that in the 3,500 years of recorded human history, there has been peace less than 10% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a while. No American generation has known peace. There's always been conflict someplace. It's rather ironic how we think about peace. Wyatt Earp named his Colt 45 revolver the Peacemaker. Too often the world considers this kind of peacemaking the best way to make peace. But when Jesus came to the earth, he came to live in peace, and he came not to coerce us and to tell us how we have to be and to confront it with violence, but rather he worked at the root of what causes us to be less than peaceful people. And what Jesus is calling people today and back then to do is to be transformed in ourselves first, so that then we can live at peace with God and with others. So the peace that we're looking for in the world begins with us. Now, we as Christians, and there's others who believe that Jesus will come again and bring peace to the world, and that's what we look forward to. But the fact of the matter is that until that day comes, we are the ones in the world that are tasked with the duty of being peacemakers. And we cannot wait to work at peace until Jesus comes again. So what is peace? Well, in English and Greek and Hebrew, which is all the languages that we speak and have heard spoken in our New Testament scriptures, they all have a slightly different idea of what peace is. In English, the word means an absence of conflict. That's what the word peace means. It's about an idea of serenity, of calm, of again, no conflict. In the Greek language, in the New Testament, and that's what the New Testament was written in, the idea of peace includes a concept of rest and being able to agree on things, on terms of living, whatever that might be. But in the Hebrew language, which is the language that Jesus spoke, the idea of peace takes on an even deeper meaning. Because the idea of peace, and the word that we often hear in conjunction with peace in the Hebrew context is shalom, has with it a concept that it means that everyone's highest good is met. So that everything that could happen to a person is for their highest good. So, when you said to someone in Greek, be at peace or whatever, you're talking about being at peace with God. And in the Hebrew sense, when you talked about peace, you would be praying for the best to happen for everyone. So, if you greeted a Jewish friend with shalom, and you could do this coming and going, it was both and, what they were saying was, may the best be yours. May all that you need, all that is good for you, may you realize that. So it wasn't just a parting, it wasn't just, have peace. It was more than that. It was about that person's life being fulfilled with whatever it was that they needed. And so if they wanted, that it said shalom to you, if you lacked good health, they would be praying and meaning, may you have good health, even though all they said was shalom. And if there's division or conflict in your home and someone then greeted you, or as you actually did say shalom, they wanted your family relationships to be restored. So it took on a grander meaning than just peace. So what does it mean for us when Jesus in his Beatitudes, in his Sermon on the Mount, says, blessed are the peacemakers? Well, I think it takes on an understanding that of all of those kinds of ideas of what the different languages means. But I think it is important for us to think about peacemaking as I said at the very beginning, someone who tries to make a situation better. And first they try to make the situation better, or the relationship better, or whatever word you want to use there, better between people and God, and then better between people and people. So peacemakers are going to be blessed because they're going to be working on bringing wholeness and reconciliation between people and God. It's important too to note that in the New Testament, every book in the New Testament has the word peace in it. And the word peace is used 88 times in the New Testament. Now that might not seem like a lot, but to me it says that peace is an important aspect of life that needed to be emphasized and still needs to be emphasized. And it was one of the things that Jesus said to the disciples as he knew that his time on earth was short. He said to them, my peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. And so if they were thinking about peace in a way that was only about the end of conflict, which is what they had hoped Jesus would do, would be to end conflict, Jesus was talking about a peace that was different than that. He was talking about a peace that first begins in a person's heart. I think it's also interesting to note, and I hadn't really ever thought about this that much, but if you think about it, Jesus didn't create conflict, especially among the disciples. Now, he often would be frustrated at their seemingly lack of cognition about what the point he was trying to make. And he called them his, dear people, and how they weren't getting it. But he never spoke, and it's never recorded that he spoke to one or another of the disciples trying to create conflict among them. He was always the one who understood that speaking ill of one another was one of those things that would create conflict, and so he was looking to create peace. It's also interesting that I'm assuming from what I've read and studied that there was a sense of peace, a sense of tranquility that Jesus kind of exuded when he was around people. Maybe that was what drew people to him. I don't know. Maybe it was that sense of peace and tranquility, of total comfort with who he was and what he was about, that brought people to him. It was a sense of peace, I think, that dwelt within him. So if we know a little bit then about peace and maybe what some of the terminology means, then the question becomes for us, and the message that Jesus is trying to get across in the Beatitudes is the challenge then for us is, how do we become peacemakers? If you think about this, maybe you've tried this. Maybe you tried to be a peacemaker with someone, a group or family or spouse, whoever it might be, and it hasn't gone all that well. Because peacemaking is not easy. But the first characteristic of a peacemaker is that they need to be at peace with God. And this can mean all different kinds of things, but basically it means that you have a sense of God's presence. And that might not be something that's overt. It might just be a sense of this greater thing that is beyond us, that is also in us. So a peace with God. And then the next characteristic of a peacemaker would be to be at peace with others. And here's where the challenge comes in. To be at peace with others. This is a hard thing to do when there's so many other things going on and people have differences of opinion and all those kinds of things that bring conflict into our lives. So how is it that we live at peace with others? Well, there's a story that happened during World War II. The story is that there were 3 airmen, American airmen, who had escaped from a POW camp, and they had made their way to a French village. And there the people took them in and helped them and hid them. And while they were there, one of the 3 who was already sick and had just not done well in the POW camp got sicker and died. And so the 2 remaining American airmen asked the local priest, Catholic priest, if they could bury their friend in the cemetery there at the church. And the priest reluctantly shook his head and said that only Catholics could be buried in the cemetery there at the church, but that they could take their friend outside of the fence, outside of the area of the cemetery, and bury their friend just outside the cemetery. And so that's what they did. But during the night, the priest and some of the other people in the village came and took down the fence that marked the edge of the cemetery and moved the fence to include the new grave. And then the priest explained to the 2 airmen, said a Protestant may not be buried in the cemetery, but there is no rule that says that we cannot move the fence to include a Protestant. God's people are called to be peacemakers. What was the point of excluding someone in that time? And so, you see, the idea of being peacemakers is to make something right again. We're called to be peacemakers. And we're given the assignment of removing the things that separate us from God and that separate us from one another. Removing the things that keep us separate from God and separate from one another. That's peacemaking. And then the third characteristic of a peacemaker is to be at peace with others. And this is also, well, again, it's a hard thing. And when I was putting this together and thinking about being a peacemaker, to be at peace with others, I have to tell you, this is one I really need to work on. I don't have a lot of peace with drivers in cars. I'll just make that confession. I think I've probably confessed that before. That's not news. But so to be at peace means that we are able to get beyond the things that conflict us about other people. There's a story of a pastor who had a couple of parishioners who were on the outs with each other. And this was a small community, and so the pastor was really concerned because it was creating turmoil in the church, because these 2 men, when they were at church meetings, when there was a vote to be taken, they always took the opposite sides, and they could not get along. And so he decided that he was going to be a peacemaker. And so he prayed about how he might do that. And so one morning after some prayer and thinking, he called up Mr. Their names have been changed to protect the guilty. So the pastor goes and visits with Mr. Smith and asks him what he thinks of Mr. Jones. And Mr. Smith said, he is the meanest and the crankiest neighbor I've ever had. And the pastor said, but he said, you have to admit though, he's really very good to his family. And Mr. Smith said, well, I guess that's true. And so the next day the pastor went to see Mr. Jones and said, do you know what Mr. Smith said about you? And Mr. Jones says, I can't imagine what kind of lie he would be telling about me. And the pastor said, well, it may surprise you to know that he said that you are very kind to your family, that you're a very good family person. Mr. Jones was surprised. And he told the pastor, I wouldn't said, but you have to admit that he's very honest in his business dealings. And Mr. Smith said, well, I guess I could agree with that. And so the pastor went back again and visited Mr. Jones, and the pastor said, Mr. Jones, do you know what Mr. Smith said about you? He said that you were the one person that he knew he could trust in business, and that you were very honest in your work. And Mr. Jones says, well, of all the things that somebody could have said about me, I wouldn't have believed it if you hadn't told me. And so the next Sunday rolls around, and these two men who had been former, enemies of a sort, when they got to church that morning, they smiled at each other. They nodded, they shook hands, and the next time there was a church meeting, they voted on the same side. Now, this is what peacemaking is all about. A peacemaker is someone who does something to improve the situation. A peacemaker works at breaking down the walls that divide people from God and divide people from each other.
Amen.
So what are the benefits of being a peacemaker? Well, Jesus said in the Beatitudes, they're being blessed. Or we talked, when we began this series, that blessed could also mean happy. So happy are those that are peacemakers. And this blessedness, I need to remind us that this blessedness that Jesus is talking about is not an outward condition, but an inward attitude. So being blessed in all of these situations in the Beatitudes is not about gaining some material kind of wealth or power or influence, but instead the blessedness comes from giving us an inner sense of peace or comfort or power or whatever it is that we need to have in our lives. This blessedness reflects on a person's character. Your character, you will be blessed. So that's a benefit of being blessed and being a peacemaker, is that inward condition, that inward character will have a sense of peace. And then another benefit of being a peacemaker, as it says in the Beatitude, is that they will be called children of God. And this points us back again to the idea that we are all in the family of God, that we're in a relationship with God, as close as we might imagine, and that imagination comes to us in the closeness of family. That we're in a relationship that points to our character. That if you're a child of God, you're acting as the character of God would act in that situation. So you're acting in a God-like way when you're being a peacemaker. Peacemaking, as I said earlier, is hard work. But peacemaking is what we have all been called to be and about. We're all called to see a situation and try to make it better. What greater calling could any of us have? And we should consider it a privilege to be a co-worker with God at making things right between people and right between people and God. What great work we've been called to do, to be peacemakers. And the promise that has been made to us as peacemakers is that we will be blessed and we will be known as children of God. I can't think of any better way to be known. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children